and welcome. To bring a more equitable approach to the world banking system, he took on the global financial establishment in an effort to change the way that poorer nations deal with wealthy ones, and made a name for himself as a determined reformer. This week on One on One, meet the former World Bank president, James Wolfensohn. The Australian-born financier was destined for great things from an early age, even though he had a few academic ups and downs. James Wolfensohn did, however, get to represent his country in the 1956 Melbourne Olympics in fencing. His rapid rise to the world of finance, first in Australia, soon had him reaching the shores of America, where the fast track continued in the 1970s. US President Bill Clinton chose him to head the World Bank in 1995, which led to 10 years of reform at the bank as Wolfensohn sought to address issues of global poverty comprehensively. His post-World Bank career included spending a year as the Middle East Quartet's special envoy, helping to coordinate Israel's withdrawal from Gaza. Global poverty issues still remain a key concern for him, so even while considering slowing things down, Jim Wolfensohn still sets an enviable pace of life. Mr. Wolfensohn, lovely to have a chance to chat with you.
Nice to talk to you.
Now, sir, you're a person that American presidents turn to for help. Bill Clinton, of course, wanting you heading up the World Bank. We had George W. Bush looking at you at Gaza as a special envoy to Gaza. And, of course, with Barack Obama in office, no knocks on the door yet? Or are you keeping a low profile?
No, I didn't grow up in Chicago. I think that's probably part of the problem. But no, I mean, I know a number of the people in the administration, and I think it's partly a question of where I was born and also probably age at this stage.
When you look at what's happened with Gaza, how do you regard the way things have slipped back? Is it like, every step forward, it's two steps back?
Well, I spent a year there in 2007, 2008. And I had the opportunity then working with Ariel Sharon, who was then Prime Minister, who regarded me with enormous suspicion. And I was appointed to the position of Special Envoy for the Quartet, which was the United States, Russia, European Union, and the UN. And I think really I discovered two things. I discovered that that task in itself was difficult, but made more complex by the fact that the Americans were doing the major negotiations themselves. Nonetheless, I was able, with Sharon, to assist him in the withdrawal from Gaza. And that went remarkably well, with no loss of life, and in a very short period of time, and with a replacement of the Israeli settlers who had been in Gaza. All in all, that provided a moment of hope in the entire Israeli-Palestinian scene. I regret that it has not been captured.
Of course, you were very well known for your time at the World Bank, where you were not afraid to say the C word, which you were told was political and not something discussed at the bank. How was it dealing with corruption?
Well, the first thing was that I recognized that corruption was one of the terrible problems that was faced by everybody in the developing world, with some notable exceptions of leaders that are uncorrupt. It wasn't just in Africa, however. It was really in many developing countries, and may I say, in many developed countries where the companies were perfectly ready to pay bribes in order to get business. And it just struck me in my first year at the bank that one of the corrosive elements in the whole area of development was this corruption. And I decided that I would talk about it in my second annual meeting speech. And the General Counsel, a wonderful man, took me aside when he knew that I was going to do this, outside my office. And he whispered to me, "Jim, you cannot use the C word." And I said, "Ibrahim, what the hell is the C word?" And he said, "Corruption." And I said, "Why can't I use it?" He said, "Well, many of your shareholders are corrupt. And what you don't want to do is to confront them with their own behavior." And I said, "Well, I've got a contract. It's the right thing to do. I'm going to do it." So I talked about the cancer of corruption in that speech. And very glad I did, because 6 months later, just about every finance minister at the semi-annual meeting talked about their steps on corruption. And it came out, and it was used then as a mark of honor that everyone was talking about corruption. And I'm very happy to say that since that time, there has been some progress. It's a long way from getting rid completely of corruption, but at least there's been some recognition.
Let's take you back to where it all began. You were born in Sydney, Australia, and your parents had immigrated from London, having already suffered as Jews. You know, as a child, were you aware of this background? Was this brought into your upbringing?
My father was an officer in the British Army, and he was very well positioned in what he was doing in England. So the reason for leaving England had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It had to do with the fact that he hadn't done very well financially, and he decided that he was going to find new fields in which he could prosper. So he went to Australia, but he went just at the beginning of the Depression. And so with the money that he had, he was prey to a lot of people in Australia, and I'm afraid within a very short time he lost whatever money he had. But my mother went out there with my sister, and in 1930, and a couple of years later, in 1933 actually, I was born. And so I never knew anything about the British background other than what they told me. And I grew up as a full-blooded Australian, and very glad I did.
And it was a warm and loving family, I gathered, despite the financial difficulties.
No, it was an amazing family, and I had amazing parents. Very bright, very cultured in every sense. In literature, my mother was a great musician and a painter. And I don't want to over-idealize the family life. It had all these wonderful aspects to it, but for the first 10 years of my life, there was a real financial pressure. Subsequently, my father's business recovered, and we became, I would say, modestly middle class.
Yeah, you had a chance to indulge in your love of chocolate, I gather, and we're a little chubby.
I was dreadfully spoiled by my parents, because for a penny a day you could buy what was known as a penny Nestles. It was a little chocolate, and I had one most nights on my bed. Not all nights, but most nights. And it's ruined me for the rest of my life, I must say.
Academically, you started out very well. You went to good schools and you started out well. You were in the top 10 in class, and then suddenly slipped to 123rd out of 135. What happened?
Unfortunately, you're correct. But that was because I skipped a couple of classes. I went to high school, 5 years of high school at the age of 10, and did my entrance to the university at 15. And frankly, I was just too young. It was absurd that I rushed or was pushed to the extent that I was. And so my academic record till my first year at the university was a steady decline. It's the only way to describe it. And it wasn't much fun. And my first year at university, I failed 3 out of 4 subjects. So it was not an august beginning.
You did manage to represent your country, though, Australia, in the 1956 Melbourne Olympics in fencing.
Yeah, in the latter 6 years of my university career doing arts and law, things started to come together, because I started to do things at an appropriate age, at the right age. And so I did a number of things, including joining the Air Force Reserve and doing things in student leadership, and crazily starting fencing, which led me to participate on the Australian team in 1956.
When did you realize you had an aptitude for it? I mean, to get to the Olympics is still something.
Well, it was a lunatic experience, because I used to play tennis, and I was one day watching the tennis, and the captain of the fencing team came up to me and said, what was I doing in the coming week? And I said, nothing. And he said, would I like to come and represent the university in fencing at the national championships? I said, but I've never fenced. He said, we'll teach you on the train to Melbourne. And I said, you've got to be out of your mind. What do you want to do that for? He said, well, we need a team of 6, and Joe's got sick, so we need somebody. We need a body. And so I represented my university in a sport that I'd never played. And I became so entranced by this experience that I decided maybe I should learn something about it. And I did, and was very fortunate that I subsequently made it to the Olympics and then the World Championships.
In spite of your mother having a huge love for music, it was quite late in life that you took an interest in it, and you have a fondness for the cello. How did that get started?
Well, it started by accident, because when when I was a kid, I played piano, of course, not very well. But when Jacqueline Dupre got multiple sclerosis, and I was 42, and Jackie was in her 20s, Elaine and I were with her and Daniel the night that they finally got the diagnosis. And she knew, Daniel Barenboim, her husband, that she finally got the diagnosis and knew that she would never play on the concert stage again. And so we were talking about what she should do, and I said, you should teach. And she said, well, no one would study with me. I said, Jackie, you got to be crazy. I would study with you. And the next day she called me at my office and said, did you mean what you said yesterday? And I said, yes. And she said, well, I found you a cello. And I said, great, Sunday at 3. And I went there the following Sunday, and after spending half an hour trying to tune the instrument, which he insisted that I do, these instruments have 4 strings, and you have to have the fifths between them, which was a disaster. But anyway, I finally learned how to do it. She insisted that she would only teach me if I would play a concert on my 50th birthday. And I thought, that's 8 years away. It's not, you know, she'll forget. But on my 49th birthday, Daniel Barenboim calls and says, we've got you organized for a concert at Carnegie Hall. And I said, you've got to be crazy. And he said, you've got a year to learn. And that I would play with Ashkenazi and himself and Yo-Yo Ma and Pinky Zuckerman and a few other unknown musicians. And it established a tradition for me that every 10 years I give such a concert.
And of course, you had a wonderful career. I'm going to touch on that in just a moment. We're going to take a short break here. More one-on-one with Jim Wolfensohn when we return. Welcome back. You're watching One-on-One. We're speaking with the former group president of the World Bank and special envoy to the Quartet for the Middle East, James Wolfensohn. Tell me about you arriving in America with just a few $100s. I think about $300 in your pocket as a graduate worker. How did things get started for you?
Well, it got started in a rather wonderful way, because the Minister of Air in Australia, I having decided that I wanted to go to Harvard for a variety of reasons, had no money to get there. And I was a young pilot officer in the Air Force, Royal Australian Air Force Reserve. And the Minister for Air, when I asked him, said yes to my request, which was, could I get a free passage to the United States? And he thought I was crazy to ask, but he helped me, and the head of the New Zealand Air Force was flying to London. And so I went to report, and he had a 4-piston engine plane that took 6 or 7 days to get there. They promoted me for the audacity to flying officer, and I hitchhiked to England. Then a benevolent uncle in England gave me a steerage passage on the Queen Elizabeth, so that got me to the United States with my total wealth of $300 with which I'd left Australia. The only problem was that in those days Harvard would lend you half the money, and I was told not to come unless I had a minimum of $3,000. And I remember going to the woman in the Advance in Aid office when I got there, and she said, oh, she's so happy to have me there. They'd had very few Australians at the Harvard Business School in 1957. And she was very happy to meet me, and I said, well, I'm very happy to meet you. Her name was Florence Glynn, Miss Glynn, I said, and I said, but there is a minor problem. She said, what's that? And I said, well, I haven't followed all the instructions. And she said, what are that? And I said, well, I only have $300, not $3,000. Could you give me all my money in the first year, and we'll worry about the second year when we get there? And she looked at me and she said, you're a very naughty boy, she said. Anyway, she did. And we conspired together, and in my second year, I helped run the laundry service and various other things, and I managed to get through. But Harvard was an extraordinary opportunity for me. I'd been a lawyer before that, and Harvard was an opening to the world. It was not only in the United States, but because of the case study method, an opportunity to consider issues on a huge variety of subjects, both commercial and political.
You proved to be a very high flyer, though. By your late 30s, early 40s, you were overseeing some fairly big deals, including the U.S. government bailout of Chrysler Corporation, which I think brought you to Washington, D.C., where the World Bank president then, Robert McNamara, spotted you.
Before I started my own firm, I was asked by Bob McNamara whether I would like to become president of the World Bank. And given that in many of my outside activities I'd taken a tremendous interest in development, I said it'd be a dream for me. And they discovered then that you had to be an American citizen. So in 3 days, they somehow made me an American citizen. I had to study the booklet all weekend, but anyway, it all happened. And then we waited. I virtually had my pajamas engraved with President of the World Bank, and was already got my wife to call me Mr. President. After a few weeks, she woke me one morning and said, "Darling, you're back to Dear Jim." And Tom Clawson took the job. And frankly, it was very lucky for me because I then formed my own firm. And I grew up a hell of a lot in that subsequent 14 years until the opportunity came again, and Bill Clinton made the decision to appoint me, which was the best thing that ever happened in my life.
What made you take the offer from George W. Bush, the next president, to become the special envoy to Gaza for the quartet?
Well, I'd done 10 years at the World Bank, and my wife and I had then planned a superb period of 6 months vacation, learning Italian and doing all the things that we had dreamed of doing, until the phone rang, actually from the Secretary of State on the aircraft flying to the Pope's funeral. And it was Condoleezza Rice asking me if I would like to do this job. And I said, "Is this your invitation?" She said, "No, I'm here with the President. And also, we'd like to announce it as soon as we get back." And I was overwhelmed that instead of being on the trash heap to have an opportunity to do something in an area of the world that I was very interested in. And so I said yes, of course, and was happy to do it.
Apart from your cancelled vacation, how did your wife Elaine feel about the risks involved with Gaza?
Well, we had to learn to live with lots of security. I'd had a minimum security when I was in the bank. I used it whenever I needed it. But I had permanent security team when I was doing the Middle East. And that's a bit intrusive, I must say. But if you want to feel self-important for a while, it's good for that, but you get over it very quickly. And I must say I was very glad when I was able to get rid of them all. They're very nice people, but you have no control over your life.
What has kept you away from any direct involvement in politics? Do you have any interest in that?
I do, but I suppose the natural place for me to be in politics would be Australia. But I've left Australia, although I still have deep roots there and go there very often. But to go into politics in this country seemed to me to be something that I just didn't want to take on. I wouldn't mind if one day someone said, "Would you like to be Secretary of State?" But the unlikelihood of that is substantial.
What do you think, going through these interesting challenges you've faced all the way through your life, is the biggest lesson you've learned?
Well, I think the first lesson is that you should not feel limited in what you aspire to do. It's not that I'm by any means the brightest or most gifted person in the world, but I've been diligent in trying to set objectives about what I'd like to do. And I established the principle that every year I sit down, New Year, and write out what it is that I would like to do. I started it when I was at university in Australia. I do it every year. I only wish I'd kept the stuff, which I haven't. But what it did for me was to organize your thinking about what were your objectives.
Apart from looking forward, do you ever do a retrospective and say, if I could turn the clock back on this, I would change this or that?
The answer to that is no. I do a retrospective. I'm pretty ruthless with myself about the things I screwed up. At least I think I'm realistic about them. But you have to take life at my age, as a whole. And by some miracle, I have a great family, a good wife, 3 kids, grandchildren. So the family side, again, it's not a miracle. My wife kept it together, but I'm benefiting from it, and I'm now reestablished in the family. And the other thing is that in terms of the balance that I've been able to get by being here and by having the advantage of the opportunities that this country offers, that the world offers. I won't limit it to this country because I'm now working on a global scale, which the World Bank gave me. I think that I'm part of a generation that has had the advantages of the jet airplane, the computer, internet, a technological revolution of enormous breadth, perhaps most that's happened in any period in history. But the world is moving towards Asia, and the challenge which we now face is to address that movement, to look at those that are left behind, the 1 to 2 billion people that there will be in Africa and in some other countries, and try and hope that you can get some sense of social justice that will lead to peace. Without it, we will not have peace.
How would you like to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
I'd like to be remembered that I was a decent father. That's first. But beyond that, I'd like to be remembered as someone who recognized that he was living in a world that was not just Fifth Avenue or Piccadilly, that was a unified world of huge diversity, a human world of great challenge and great potential, and that I recognized these challenges before some others, and hopefully contributed to a planet that might be more peaceful, more environmentally sound, and more equitable.
Jim Wolfensohn, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.